Okay, now with that said, Jesus moves to the second part of the teaching here, which is about his yoke, okay? And that's Y-O-K-E, not Y-O-L-K, not his yoke, but his yoke. When I was a kid, I used to hear the word yoke, and I thought it was like egg yolk, and it didn't make any sense. You know, Jesus saying, take my yoke upon you. I was like, what is Jesus talking about eggs for? But this is the image here of a yoke that would be used for beasts of burden when they were plowing the fields, right? The wooden harness that they would use to harness oxen or together in order to plow the fields, right? And in this case, Jesus says something really remarkable. He says, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy burdened or heavy laden, and I'm going to give you rest, okay? So he's inviting us into rest. Now at that point, this sounds great. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty tired. Especially if you're an American. We like to work, and we like to work hard, and we tend to work ourselves to death. And so being a heavy burden with all of our labors is a natural condition. It's something that's been part of the human condition since the fall of Adam in Genesis chapter 3, right? That fruitless toil and labor are going to be part of the lot of humanity after the fall in the Old Testament. So Jesus is speaking to everyone here. If you're laboring and you're heavy burden, come to me and I will give you rest. And so that sounds really good. Well, how do I get that rest, Jesus? Well, take this giant piece of wood, this yoke, and put it on your shoulders. That's how you're going to rest with me. All right, so this is one of those parables, one of those riddles that Jesus gives, right? Usually if you invite someone into rest, you don't place a giant heavy piece of wood on their shoulders, right? You don't say, oh, are you tired? Would you like to rest? Here, pick up these 2 50-gallon buckets of water and carry them with me, right? So it's a paradox. It's a mystery. There's another mystery he's giving to us here. So he says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. So he's talking about his teaching here. For I am meek or gentle and lowly or humble in heart. And that's how you will find rest for your souls. Okay? For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So what's Jesus doing here? Well, one of the things you'll see in just a couple of chapters in Matthew's Gospel is that Jesus taught in parables. And parables weren't just, nice stories that were like drawing on everyday life and making a comparison between two different things. They were also riddles. The word parable can refer to a riddle. And this is really a riddle here. Jesus is posing this riddle of the fact that if you take his yoke upon your shoulders, it's going to be a burden, but it's actually going to be light and it's going to be easy. Right? So what's he referring to here? Well, two things. First, you might recall from the 13th Sunday in Ordinary Time that the last time Jesus talked about putting wood on your shoulders was when he said to take up your cross and follow him. So on one level, he's continuing the image of the cross, of bearing the cross in order to be his disciple, right? Because it's only through the cross that you'll get to the resurrection. It's only through suffering that you'll learn how to love and that you'll taste the glory of the world to come. That's one dimension of the meaning. The other dimension, though, here, and the more primary one, I think, in context, is Jesus, not just his teaching, but his way of life, right? He's not just telling us to accept his teachings here. He's telling us to imitate him in two key ways. First, in gentleness or meekness. Second, in humility. So those are the yokes of Jesus here. Gentleness and humility. So this should make us think back to the 5th chapter of Matthew's Gospel, the Beatitudes, right? When he talks about the people who are poor in spirit, the humble, they're happy. They're going to inherit the kingdom of God. Blessed are the meek, the gentle. They're going to inherit the earth. Even though it looks like the powerful get the earth, in fact, those who are gentle are the ones who get the earth. Those who love their enemies, right? Who turn the other cheek. That is the real power and that's the real peace that comes from living according to the Beatitudes and living the gospel here. So Jesus is inviting the disciples to imitate him in his humility and in his gentleness. And in doing so, he's actually alluding to the Old Testament. Surprise, surprise, right? He does this all the time. But in this case, it's interesting because the allusion here is to one of the books in the Catholic Old Testament that's not in the Protestant Old Testament. In the book of Sirach, chapter 51, this isn't quoted in the lectionary, but I thought I would give it to you here. We see the exact same imagery. In Sirach 51, verse 26 to 27, wisdom in person. The person of wisdom is speaking. And wisdom says this, put your neck under the yoke. Let your souls receive instruction. It is to be found close by. See with your eyes that I have labored little and found myself much rest. Notice the two images there. Taking the yoke of wisdom upon you will actually give you rest if you learn to live according to wisdom. So what's Jesus doing here? He's not just showing us he's a teacher of parables. He's basically, in a sense, saying, I am wisdom in person. And I'm calling you to imitate me in my humility and in my gentleness. And if you do that, you're going to actually find peace. You're going to actually find rest. Not for your bodies, but for your souls. You're going to find rest for your souls, and you'll find the joy that comes from following me. Right? Now you might think, okay, well, how's that really possible? I mean, especially if you're going through life and you're experiencing just the burden of labor itself and the worries and the cares and anxieties, for example, of family life and married life, they can get really burdensome and really heavy at times. What's Jesus talking about here? How can a yoke be light? Well, one thing that's important to remember here is that the word yoke, zugos here, a number of scholars have pointed this out, is that ordinarily a yoke would be carried by two animals, be carried by two oxen. Like you'd yoke two oxen together, and then they would plow the field, right? So what happens there is the animals, in a sense, aid one another as they carry the burden of the yoke. So one interpretation of Jesus' words here is that what he's inviting us into is not like, here, you take my yoke upon you, I'm going to give it to you, you carry it by yourself, but that I will help you shoulder the yoke, right? In other words, it's almost like the image of Simon of Cyrene. What does he do? He helps Jesus carry the cross. So they carry the cross together to Calvary. And that's really what I think Jesus is inviting us into here. He doesn't want to just be humble and gentle himself. He wants us to take up the yoke of humility and gentleness, and he will help us to carry our burdens and to carry our crosses, so that we can follow him. And when we do that, what we'll discover is rest for our souls. Because the reality is that his yoke is the only yoke that's light. His is the only one that's really easy. It doesn't look easy, right? But the reality is that the only true yoke that's easy to carry is the one that Christ helps us carry. Because he's going to shoulder it with us. Most of us try to go through this life just carrying all our burdens by ourselves. And that's what makes them so hard. Christ here offers to carry it with us in imitation of him.